Hello, everybody. You are here for the Welcoming Week cultural panel. Um, I'm your facilitator today, and I'm a welcomer. My name is Jo Anderson Cavinta. I'm the Diversity Services Coordinator for the King County Library System. I'm here live in beautiful Issaquah, Washington, at our headquarters. And so I'm going to be guiding you through this program and introducing our panelists in just a moment. You're here today because you're interested in having a discussion about feeling welcome in Issaquah as an immigrant and a person of color, and learning what that experience is like. We'll explore Issaquah's past and present through the eyes of people of color and immigrants in our community. We'll hear how Issaquah's history has impacted the present and share ideas for working together as a community to make everyone feel welcome. If you are aware of the movement, the Welcoming Week movement is really about communities bringing together immigrants, refugees, and longtime residents to build strong connections and affirm the importance of welcoming and inclusive places in achieving collective prosperity. And so we would be remiss if we didn't do an acknowledgement of the first peoples of our area. And so I'm going to take a moment to do that now. We acknowledge that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, including traditional unceded territories of all tribes and bands of the Duwamish, Snohomish, Tulalip, Snoqualmie, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Suquamish, and Wenatchee nations, encompassing all of what is now King County. We honor with gratitude and land itself and thank the original caretakers who are still here and have lived here since time immemorial. It's also important to acknowledge that this evening at sunset, Rosh Hashanah begins, which means head of the new year in Hebrew. It's a 2-day celebration that marks the beginning of the Jewish high holiday season each autumn. And it begins, as I mentioned, this sunset. So, with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Erica Manez, who is going to talk to us and present about the history of welcoming in Issaquah.
Thanks so much, Jo. So my name is Erica Manez. I'm the director of the Issaquah History Museums. And the Issaquah History Museums collect, preserve, and share photographs and artifacts that represent Issaquah's past and present. So I've been asked to share some of Issaquah's origin story as a community, a story that we are all part of by virtue of living in this community. So somebody who lives in Issaquah is called an Issaquahan. So when you hear me talking about Issaquahans, I'm talking about people who identify Issaquah as their home. So if you're an Issaquahan, consider adopting that word and bringing it into your vocabulary. Welcoming Week is all about welcoming newcomers into our community. And as the city's historian, I have to tell you that Americans and Issaquahans have not always made others feel welcome here. In fact, we often start the story of America, especially the American West, by talking about how white people discovered and settled open land while leaving out the story of Native Americans altogether. So Issaquah was originally the home to the Sammamish Native Americans. They're a band of the Duwamish tribe, and they established at least one longhouse at the mouth of the Issaquah Creek. We also know that members of the Snoqualmie tribe lived on the east side of Lake Sammamish for a long period of time. When the first white settlers reached the Issaquah Valley in the 1860s and 1870s, one of the first cash crops they established were hops. And they hired Native American hop pickers to pick hops on their farm. At best, Native American workers were exploited. They were paid partly in pieces of paper that they could use at the company store, which was also owned by the hop farmer. So at the worst, physical workers were often physically abused. And so talking about hops picking in the Native American community is a painful subject. So the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855 forcibly relocated, note the air quotes, it's not like folks were willing to pack up and move, but the treaty relocated many tribal members into the area of the Tulalip Reservation. And so many of the Native Americans in the area moved at that time. The Snoqualmie tribal members remained on the lake until as late as the Depression and worked in the lumber mill that was located there in a town called Monaghan. In 1885, some of the first Chinese immigrants to enter the valley were violently driven out within about 24 hours of arriving. White residents of the valley attacked them in the night, killing 4 of the men. These men were victims of a national movement against Chinese immigrants. So anti-Chinese violence was rife in the United States at this time, and it was not unique to Issaquah. And a lot of the violence was supported and reinforced by the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. So this act was the first significant law that started restricting immigration to the United States, and it effectively banned all immigration from China until 1943. So the Chinese Exclusion Act was inspired by declining wages and economic woes, which people blamed on the Chinese workers. So the fact of the matter is the Chinese were 0.2% of the US population, so really not big enough to rationally be responsible for the economic ills. And this is something that we see reiterated in contemporary history. We pick out a particular ethnic group and then blame them for economic factors that are happening in the country. The act also focused on maintaining, quote, racial purity. So that was a pretty impactful action that did not encourage further Chinese immigrants to try and make their home in Issaquah. So Issaquah's population began to grow quickly in the 1880s when the rail line reached Issaquah and made it possible to start developing coal deposits in the hills around Issaquah. So a lot of new residents moved to the area at that time, and you could actually hear a variety of different languages being spoken. So there were immigrants here from coal mining areas in Finland, Austro-Hungary, Italy, northern France, England, and many other places where there had been coal mining back in Europe. And so these people immigrated to the area. Lumber mills also became a central focus of other nearby towns like High Point and Preston, and immigrants from Sweden and Norway came to the area to work in the lumber and logging industry. So a number of immigrants came during that time period, nearly all of them from European nations. In the 1920s, Issaquah was among many small communities with an active chapter of the Ku Klux Klan, and it was the site of one of the largest KKK rallies ever in 1925. And it's commonly known that the Klan in general targeted Black people. In Issaquah and some Western states, they also targeted Catholic immigrants who came from Italy, Austro-Hungary, and other nations. So it's not surprising, given all that, from the 1930s on, Issaquah was a predominantly, one might say relentlessly, white community. One of the only Asian families in the area, the Kobukatas, were interned during World War II as a result of the Federal Executive Order of 9066. So we kind of see this theme recurring where a national policy ends up playing out on a local level. So before we talk a little bit about Issaquah's recent growth and the increase in community diversity that we've experienced over the last 40 to 50 years, I just want to acknowledge that as hard as Issaquah is working to make newcomers from everywhere feel welcome, it can be challenging to override some of the messages that are sent by our federal government in the form of immigration laws. A lot of our immigration laws favor some nationalities over others, and deportation is a constant and plausible threat for millions of immigrants, and that's a really difficult way to live. So in spite of all this heavy history about Issaquah's racial and racist past, today Issaquah is striving to be a more inclusive and welcoming city where everyone feels appreciated, recognized, and embraced. Over the course of the past 30 years, Issaquah's population of ethnic minorities has increased from about 5% of the overall population in 1990 to 36% of the population in 2018. So we're going to look at a couple stories and statistics. Monica is pulling up my slides. There we go. So I started in, so this is a general population graph of Issaquah that shows how small the town was in the early 1900s. We're looking at up until 1960, less than 1,000 people in town, so very small, very rural. We start seeing the population begin to grow significantly in 1970. And then of course you can see that the last 30 years or so, the population has increased dramatically. And so we're now a medium-sized city rather than a small town. So if we can go to the next slide. So I started looking at Issaquah's ethnic history in 1980 because I found some nice articles in the Issaquah Press about the census in 1990. So in 1980, I found that there was an entire full-page spread entitled "The People of Issaquah," and it talked about almost everything in terms of demographics, where people lived, how they lived, who they were married to, how many children they had. You can see I pulled out a couple little pictures into statistics. Most people are married and have children. Hardly anybody fishes for a living, and less than 2% made non-durable goods. So we've got this fine focus on kind of random factoids like who fishes and who makes durable goods. But nowhere in this entire one-page article did they mention anything about Issaquah's ethnic makeup. So that tells us that while there were probably ethnic minorities living in Issaquah at that time, the topic of diversity had not really come up, and we were not thinking of Issaquah in any way as a place that had more than one ethnic group living in it. So if we can go to the next slide, we can start looking some actual statistics. So starting in 1990, we see Issaquah is 95% white. The total population is just a little less than 8,000 people. In 10 years, those numbers changed quite a bit. The population doubled just about, and the percentage of white population decreased down to 88%. And we start seeing a larger representation among Asian, Hispanic, Black, and Native American populations. And then we can go to the next one, and we can see again, another 10 years pass, and in 2010, we've almost doubled again in population as a community. And now up to 25% of the residents of Issaquah are from diverse communities. So we can see that there's 18% Asian population, 6% Hispanic, 1% Black. The Native Americans are less than 1%, and I should have included that decimal point, so pardon me for that. And then as we move into 2018, which is the most recent year for statistics, we see that, again, the diversity in Issaquah has grown, and we're made up of many more Asian, Hispanic, Black, Native American, and other groups in addition to the white population. So as Issaquah's diversity increases, our community has really benefited also from an increase in activities, discussions, stories from other cultures, and those stories and activities start becoming a more sustaining part of our community culture. So, and I'm really pleased to be involved in Welcoming Week as one of those sustaining activities that brings us closer together.
Thank you, Erica, for providing such a powerful introduction to our talk. It's just so important to know our history and to know it from a real holistic and honest perspective, because without identifying racist aspects of our history, it's hard to move forward. We have to be able to identify in order to address past harms and to come together and be that inclusive place that we want to be. You might be asking yourself, how does Erica know so much about Issaquah's history? Well, let me tell you, Erica is the executive director of Issaquah's History Museum and has been for the last 22 years. And so lives in Seattle with her husband, 2 sons, 2 cats, and a dog, and is just so knowledgeable, as you can tell. You might have a lot of questions. We are going to have a bit of time at the end of our session for questions. So if you want to jot your questions for Erica now in the chat, and we'll check that out and see if we can address some of them later. But now that you know where she works, you could probably get a hold of her, and I'm sure she'd be happy to go into more details. Thank you, Erica. All right, so we are going to talk to our panelists here today. We are actually going to start with Alicia Spinner. And so let me tell you a little bit about Alicia. So Alicia has been in Issaquah for the past 10 years, living in the Highlands, raising 2 young children while also volunteering extensively with the community, serving as one of her life goals. Since moving to Issaquah, Alicia's dedication to diversity and inclusion has led her to found 3 community groups: The Toddler Playgroup creates a trusted space for moms and caregivers to create connections. The Latino Club shares and celebrates Latino culture as a community, and Club Inclusive gives children of all abilities the chance to embrace their differences and learn together about the power of love and acceptance. Currently, Alicia is the editor of Issaquah Schools Foundation's Cultural Bridges magazine, where she works tirelessly to create resources that serve as a community bridge between Issaquah School District and local parents with school-aged children who, like Alicia, did not grow up in the American educational system. So, Alicia, I'm going to pass it to you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me at least?
Yes.
So sorry, I don't know what's going on with my Wi-Fi or my computer. I've been trying, but I want to share my story with you. So I'm Alicia Spinner. I'm an immigrant from Mexico. I never thought about leaving my country, even my city, Monterrey. I have a big family with deep roots in Mexico. Monterrey is a city with 5 million people and the most beautiful mountains. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. In general, you know, people is very nice in Monterrey, very friendly. People work hard. I was always very proud to be a citizen of Monterrey, but I cannot tell you that everything is perfect over there. There is a lot of classism. It's not about problems between races, but with classes. I met my husband in Monterrey. He is an American. He was there working for GE. He had a work visa that expired after a year that he was there. So we went together to San Francisco. And then we went to Boston to study. And then we went to West Virginia for a good business opportunity. There, I learned about racism. I won't go in detail, but I can assure you that we stayed there as long as we could. We did not leave when we were sitting in tables with neighbors who told us they did not have a passport because none any other place was as good as America. I mean, they knew I was from Mexico. We did not leave when I learned that the black people live in the other side of the railway. We stay. We did not leave when I took my Volkswagen car to the shop and they told me that they could not help me because that was a car from the enemy, or that the enemy had been made, Germany. And I did not leave when I was pregnant and none of the local doctors wanted to see me because I was Mexican. I had to go to a city 2 hours away, and that's how I had my 2 kids. I had big dreams about changing people's minds, and I hope I did a little. But we left one day when when my son was a little boy and we were at a birthday party on a Sunday. And we realized everyone was laughing at my son, who was speaking a mix of English and Spanish. We wanted him to be bilingual, but nobody else understood the value of that. I clearly remember when my son looked at me, and he was little, he was 3 years old, and he looked at me and I just felt so bad and I knew I had to go. That was it. So we left the party and we went to our kitchen table, we opened a map and we start talking about the Pacific Northwest. We came like 2 weeks later, we came to Vancouver, BC. We came to Seattle and to Portland. Those were the 3 cities that we wanted to explore. And when a real estate agent brought us to Issaquah Highlands, I was sold. We came and we came to a park and my son just ran off to the park and started playing with all the kids. And there was so much diversity and people were just nice to each other and they were talking to each other. and I knew I was home. In that moment, I knew. So I jumped in immediately. And in those, and I've been here for 10 years now. For 10 years, I've been citizen of Issaquah. And I have been organizing clubs and groups for people of all cultures. And I have been volunteering in my kids' schools, and in my community and in the city. And just as I was very proud to be from Mexico, and I'm very emotional, now I'm very proud to be a citizen of Issaquah. But I don't take it for granted. I recently was talking to a person who was telling me that she was one of the first families that moved to Klahani. And she told me that her experience wasn't as my experience. It was harder for her, for sure. And things have changed, and I'm grateful for all the people who has made this city welcoming. Now, not everything is perfect, and I told you my story because I want you to know that a lot of immigrants like me have scars about experiences like the ones I had living in West Virginia. And I really, I invite you to be mindful of that. Many families like mine came to Issaquah just looking for a place where they could feel welcome, but there is a lot of work to do. I believe that organizations need to be careful about who is in charge of doing community events. Board members need to make sure that the people who are helping the community have their hearts in the right place. And they're not only doing it to fulfill a goal for their organization. We know that most of the organizations now had included equity goals, and that's really good, intermissions, and that's wonderful. But we need to make sure that the people who is interacting with the community, they really believe on that goal. And that's not always the case. As an immigrant living in Issaquah, I deal with microaggressions almost every day. It's nothing big as when I was in West Virginia, but microaggressions linger in my mind and I try to ignore them all the time, even if I know it's not healthy for me or my children. And I would like to give you some examples because I think that today is all about learning. And so one example is, this is the most common one. When I meet a person, I start talking and then they hear my accent like you just did. And then they hear my broken English and they ask, where are you from? And this in my mind, you know, it works differently. In my mind, I immediately have little questions that are bothering me. Questions like, are they wondering about my path to this country? Or if I cross the border legally? Are they thinking that I'm here to take away their jobs? Are they honestly okay with me being here? And I don't know. In many cases, I have conversations with people and I just never know what is in their minds. And then I know that they don't do it. Most of the people don't do it to hurt me, but it's just, I just want to invite you to be mindful of the questions that we do to people. Another example is my son came home one day telling me kids at school had been calling him the honorary Asian because he loves math. He's really good at it. But children thought that they were giving him a compliment, saying that to him. Even the teacher laughed, and my son didn't like that at all. The message that he was really receiving and that what he explained to us in the dining table was that, you know, why people doesn't believe that Mexicans or Americans can be smart as Asians are. He is a Mexican American and he is as proud as to be Mexican as to be American. So he was really hurt. My daughter, that's another example. She has been asked many times if we have papers or not. At the beginning, she did not understand at all what she was being asked. So I explained to her. And she knows now that, again, most of the people is not trying to be mean to her. In many cases, the little kids are just worried that, you know, maybe we're gonna have to leave the country because politics have changed. and kids are worried. But what I, will love if parents teach their kids to know why parents are not teaching their kids that those are no questions that they should be asking little kids. And I guess it's all about that we all need to talk about race more. And these opportunities like the one today is just a wonderful example of the work that we need to be doing. No, everyone. I will invite everyone to Google microaggressions and to learn more about, because I think we all do it every day. And there is a lot of little things that we can do to make people feel more welcome. This is my hometown now, and I'm very proud of it. And thank you for having me. I'm sorry my video is not working, but I hope you guys were able to listen.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Thank you for modeling what Welcoming Week is about, because even though this is a week-long celebration, it's really a reminder that we should be doing this every day. We should be looking for opportunities to connect, and like you said, normalizing these conversations. That's part of it, right? Let's talk about what is a microaggression. What does it look like? Because something that seems as harmless as asking someone where they're from, as someone who's mixed race, Filipino, white, when I get the question where I'm from, that's not the question people want to know. Yeah. They want to know, what's your ethnicity? I'm curious about you. And there's something to be said about being open, and then being open to what the person's response is going to be. You may offend somebody, and it's good to know, or you may open up a dialogue. So thank you so much for that. And you all might have some great comments for Alicia. Maybe her story resonates with you, or maybe you have a question. So please do drop that in the chat, and hopefully we can get to some of that a little bit later. Right now, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Manny Brown. So born and raised in Spokane, Washington, Manny attended North Idaho College from Eastern Washington University and earned wrestling scholarships at both schools. Manny coached wrestling in Spokane, Washington, Concord, California, and most recently in Issaquah. Manny is currently assistant coach to the Issaquah Eagles wrestling team. Manny has lived in the Issaquah area for more than 30 years. His passions are wrestling and woodworking. He is a member of the East Shore Unitarian Church, and he's active in the Black Lives Matter movement. Manny is the originator of Flash Dance, a racial justice action group in the cities east of Seattle, which for the past 5 years has advocated for the BLM movement and marginalized people of color, urging passerbys to start the conversation about racial injustice by being visible on different street corners each weekend. Manny, I'm handing it over to you. Manny, you're muted.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. My story starts many years ago when I was around 13, and I used to play with friends in school. And around the time the Pettis Bridge crossing in Selma, and their dogs were set on the participants of the march. When I went back to school, friends I've been playing with for years say, well, I guess we need to get the dogs out on you. And that was my first experience with racism that really stuck with me. Jump ahead years later, and I move on and get married and have kids, and we have to decide where we're going to live. We have choices between Tacoma area or Issaquah area or Texas. Texas was out. That wasn't going to happen. So we chose Issaquah area. And it occurred to us later that what we have to give up to live in Issaquah. I believe Erica mentioned earlier that in 1990, there was 0% Black people in Issaquah, where I was part, and my family was part of that 0%. And it's increased since then, but still minor increase from our perspective. Some of the experiences we've had in Issaquah have been good. We've been approached by many people and want to know what they can do. But the main things that really hits us is the negative things that happen to us. For example, we were here maybe a month into our house, and we invited folks up to the house. Out of 5 of the people that we invited, 3 of them, all people of color, got stopped by the police on the way up to the house. Now that average is not good. It occurred to us that we had to make a stance even then and question why we were being stopped and that sort of thing. My son, when he was an athlete in high school, was stopped running towards the house, working out, jogging, and police stopped him wondering where he lived and where he was going. So those are the things that kind of stick with you, and it just kind of sets up what you want to do in the future. So jump ahead again, in 2015, I had a chance to go to Selma, Alabama, and cross the Pettus Bridge on the anniversary. And it was an amazing event. I happened to take my 87-year-old father with me, who had grew up in Mississippi, Louisiana area. And he was thrilled to walk. And that's when it hit me that I've got to do more than just be self-involved. So when it came back, we started up, we called the Flash Stance, which is a group of people that stand out on different corners on the east side of Seattle, usually for an hour on Sundays on the weekend. And we've been doing it for 5 years. And we go from Factoria, some in Redmond, Issaquah. I believe they're starting one up in Woodinville. So the areas where there isn't a lot of diversity, and we've had a lot more involvement since 2016 for some reason, but we've had a lot more involvement since then. So I think Issaquah has been very receptive in allowing us to be ourselves, but the questions are asked and we get a few microaggressions along the way that we have to take the time to explain what they are and why. And it does take a lot of effort and energy from my point of view. You're always in that teaching mode. And sometimes you need to be able to step out and just enjoy the time. So you have to pick your battles sometimes. So I am still in the process of helping coaching in Issaquah area. And a few people ask, why do I still do it for so many years? And if I think about it, it's because in this area, there's not a lot of people of color that hold any type of power, anything that someone can look up and say, I want to be like that. And I just decided that there was something that I wanted to do to show that our young folks of color, that they can be and do anything they want or need to if they work hard enough to do so. So that is my story. And again, thank you so much for inviting me here. Looking forward to any questions.
Thank you so much, Manny. Yes, if Manny's story, if there's something that resonates with you, again, or if you have questions, please drop it in the chat. I think, you know, it's important because when we talk about Welcoming Week, it's about, welcoming immigrants, refugees, new arrivals, but we can't erase the stories of Black and Indigenous history in the United States. It's an important story to include, and thank you for being a model of engaging and welcoming folks. And I love the flash dance. I get that reference. I'm a child of the 80s. And I love the mission of what you're doing, and to, again, just that theme of normalizing conversations. And if we don't have these conversations, we don't get to the part of reckoning and repair to heal and become an inclusive community. So thank you so much. Next is Pat Sadat Gachu. So Pat is originally from the Cameroon, has lived in the USA for 27 years, a total of 14 years in the Seattle area, and in Issaquah for the past 9 years. She is a mother of 2 daughters who attend ISD, high school and elementary school, Issaquah, of course. Her kids have attended 5 different schools in the Issaquah School District. She is a trained multidisciplinary scientist who obtained her PhD from Washington State University and a master's of public health here I am, the non-scientist, epidemiology, she'll tell you, from the University of Washington. Pat, I'm handing it to you.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks to the other panelists who shared their stories. Just as Joe said, I'm originally from Cameroon. I moved to the United States at 18 to come, or 19 to attend college, and I actually attended college, as an undergraduate at HBCUs in Alabama, Tuskegee, then Alabama A&M University. I got the opportunity to come to Washington State. I had a scholarship, and I was eager to discover the United States. I hopped on a bus, and I traveled from Montgomery, Alabama, all the way to Pullman, Washington. And between school, life happened. I got married to a wonderful gentleman who's also from Cameroon, and we did a long distance thing in New York, Pullman, for a couple of years, and he moved to Seattle, and I moved to Seattle also in the early 2000s to be a postdoc at the University of Washington after my training in Washington State University. Well, we were young and ambitious, and as much as we loved being in Seattle, we wanted to discover the Silicon Valley. And with the brand new baby, we packed and we went to the Silicon Valley, where Patrick just got a job he's a software engineer. And we had decided I was going to stay home that year after my postdoctoral training at University of Washington. I took a year off with the baby, moving to California, a brand new place. And that was very interesting, In academia, all my years in school, big universities, I've met other international students, it was a very forgiving environment, I would say. Mingling among grad students, undergrad students, all fun, but here I am, PhD, postdoctoral trainings with a baby in California. Husband is working. Of course, I do what I do. I go into the community and I meet people. And that's when reality hits, just another Black woman with a baby. It was difficult to make friendships, I would say that, just sum it up. Luckily, after a year, I went back to work, did another postdoc at Stanford University, and naturally, the kid, my kid was 5, and we had to make a decision, where do we want to live next? It was natural for us to come back in the Seattle area because of several reasons. We had felt good. I mean, we felt good living in Seattle. At that point, Seattle had become our home away from home, and we made the move. We made the move back. But we were not going back in the in the university district, right? We have a kid, and we want good schools. We want nature, quieter life, and our realtor took me one afternoon in the Issaquah Highland, The context is this. I mean, as a student in Washington State University, I'll come to Seattle once in, maybe at least twice a month, because Patty was already here. And every time I would cross, you know, late 90s, you know, coming into Seattle, Issaquah, Sammamish was the forest. You know, I had never stopped there. So when the realtor taking me there, like, where is he taking me to? You know, I have to say that I was a bit biased. I was like, okay, but I kept open-minded. And he took me to the Issaquah Highland, the park. And being there, all the kids, you know, speaking different languages. It was towards the end of the evening. We walked a little bit. I could smell the curries, the different food around, and that was it. I was sold, and this is where we're gonna make our home with the kid. And we moved here. I will say Issaquah Highland was very welcoming. I had taken another couple of months off to help us settle. I was, you know, I met the community. I met, you know, wonderful community in Issaquah Highland. It was right. It was just the right place for us. However, a couple of years later, the family grew, and we decided, well, maybe we should go down the hill and get something a bit bigger for us. And we did. We went down the hill, 2 kids, and I had felt, I mean, I had been integrated in community in Washington and in Issaquah Highland, I would say. And I wanted to do the same when I went down the hill. And that's when, you know, it hit me. It was different, you know, as a Black immigrant mother, it's natural for me to be involved in school activities. And that's when I started noticing the little things, you know. Newcomer, people start telling you how, when you have a question for the school district, or, you know, schools are wonderful, you know, don't take me wrong. When you hear things such as, well, in the United States, this is how we do things. And I'm thinking, I've been here 20-something years. I've had another kid, you know, I've had kids in the school district. So why am I told that in the United States that this is how we do things? I started noticing things I had not paid attention to before. New family coming, and you know, at the end of the school on Wednesdays or Tuesday, whenever, we will form cliques. Mothers usually form cliques. I'm sorry to say mothers. Usually mothers pick up the kids from school. But then the new families were still on the side. And that made me really think, are we a welcoming environment for the new families, right? And so just as Alicia said, we live in a wonderful community, but some of those little things we do, we have to be mindful, pay attention. One of the simplest way to say welcome to someone is, oh, do you want to come play with us? Can the kid join us in the park, right? Not to lecture to anyone, but those are the little things that I started noticing. Microaggression, yeah, I definitely say, yeah, we have to be mindful on what we say and how it can be interpreted, especially for new families coming into a new environment. But the wonderful things, though, that we are already doing in our community, over the years, I've noticed how the diversity celebrations, especially in our schools, has grown bigger and bigger. You know, more and more representative countries to showcase their culture, and the school environment is very welcoming. And even people without kids have started to, you know, to show up for those events. So I would say I'm blessed to live in an open-minded place where most people will welcome us, and let's continue tradition. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience moving to Issaquah and with the school district. So important. I mean, that's a place where our children and families gather. And I think what you said about, you know, when you're in those conversations and people are asking, well, and you're suggesting things and people are saying, well, that's not how we do things. I think when we say as a community, we value diversity, if we're really paying attention to our diversity, that means we're going to hear stories and incorporate new ideas. If we keep doing things the way we have been, how are we going to be inclusive, and how are we going to expand our community? So thank you so much for that. I just wanted to point out, y'all, that Alicia, you can now see her. Hi, Alicia. Good to see you. Thank you. Sorry about the technical issues. I know how that goes. I think we all do. So I am going to introduce Paul Luwali. And so Paul, as the president and CEO of Friends of Youth, Paul provides leadership to one of the oldest human services organizations in East King County. His role includes positively impacting over 6,500 children, youth, and their families each year at 23 sites and programs in 18 cities across the Puget Sound region, including operating the only overnight youth shelter on the east side. I'm handing it over to you, Paul.
All right, thank you very much. So thank you, Joe, but thank you also to the panelists for sometimes it's hard to share tough stories. So thank you for sharing your tough stories, all in the spirit of Welcome Week. So I'll start off with just kind of, what is Welcome Week and how I look at Welcome Week. And I really look at it as a time when, organizations and communities bring together, whether it's immigrants, refugees, and long-time residents, to build strong connections and really affirm the importance of welcoming and being inclusive as part of achieving collective prosperity. And when I think of everything that's going on right now, we have COVID, it's that time of that time when we have, campaigns going on. So the political rhetoric is almost at a crescendo. We've had a lot of issues and conversations related to race. So it's really a very challenging time for most. And I think Welcome Week is just a great place for us to remind us that how important the whole notion of being inclusive and what that means in a community. So I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you very much. But that's really why I wanted to be engaged in this conversation. And to some of the things that some of folks said earlier, and the introduction as far as how far Issaquah has come and what Issaquah really used to be, and sharing that historical perspective. And it's so important to have this history as far as trying to move forward and trying to figure out what do we need to do or how do we do better. You can't sweep history under the rug. So I really am a proponent of, we need to talk about that and share that and celebrate some of the things the strides that we've made. To Pat, who said, Issaquah was a forest. And I think when I first moved to the east side, so this is about 12 years ago, I think even just the name Issaquah sounded like the forest to me, and I remember what that looked like then. So Manny, I feel you saying how probably you were part of the 0%, even though you were still there. And it's always interesting how we look at numbers and how we display those numbers. But I think back to then where we're talking about Issaquah having a population of almost 40,000 and 26% of them being, folks who are immigrants. And I'm like, wow, because I think I remember when it was maybe about 5,000 or something like that, as far as, or less of people who are people of color or immigrants or something like that. So, but, King County's population, immigrant population especially, has been growing and has grown 64% since 2000. So during my time here on the east side, I've really seen Issaquah grow and blossom into a vibrant community, and I don't think of it as a forest. Now I have a lot of friends there, and I still have to hightail it over there. But I'm a lifelong, advocate and champion for the east side, and my work allows me to engage in communities. And throughout, I think as a person who has spent my entire professional life engaging in communities, I believe finding out who's in your community and how we serve them is really where it's at. That's my passion. My passion has always been community. So trying to figure out who's out there in the community, how are they moving their families? Just think every panelist has talked about their families coming into the community, and how are they engaging in this wonderful experience or journey we have here in America. So many people in our community, that's all they want to do. They just want to enjoy America. And any community should be welcoming them so that they can actually enjoy that community. And when we think, I think we started off by talking about who is an Issaquahan and being proud of being an Issaquahan. So it's always interesting when somebody has already made the decision to say, I am going to move into a community just to get to that community. and not be welcomed is very, very interesting as far as when I think about it, and I've worked in communities for a very long time, and I've seen that happen repeatedly. If people understood, when we talk about words, we like to throw words around and talk about citizenship, which is a Latin word derived, from the word city. So, in the olden days, people identified themselves as belonging to cities, not countries or anything else. It was cities. So imagine you trying to identify yourself with a city. I want to be an Issaquah, just to get there and be told, well, we don't want you to be an Issaquah. And it's a very interesting notion. And I think Welcoming Week and Welcome Week experience is really a chance that we have to galvanize ourselves around that very concept of truly who is a citizen, and what should we be doing. We love to talk about our values in America and the strength of our history and experiences. And I think when I think of communities, I cannot think, and I usually say this to a lot of different work that I've done with, especially immigrant communities, is how do we welcome the stranger? And I'll share just a little story about something that happened to me a few years. I think this was about 2015, 2016. And I was on the East Side working for a not-for-profit, and a colleague of mine, there was very few of us who were people of color, so I have a very close Latina colleague of mine called me and said, hey, Paul, here's what's going on. I got this letter from this group, this volunteer in this group, and they're looking to have a kind of a bash to welcome some immigrants, but it's going to be on New Year's Day. At the time, I worked for an organization that had a facility, and I was in charge of the facilities. And so they wanted to use the facilities, and it was New Year's Day. And I was one of those leaders who had said, absolutely not. Everybody stays at home with their families on New Year's Day. So I can't open the facility because I want my staff to enjoy their families on New Year's Day. So my colleague, said, let me send you this email they sent me. And I read the email, and I decided to call the person directly and have a conversation with them. And so I called this lady and I said, hey, here's a deal. We want our staff to be, if I open the facility, I have to have staff. I have to have all these things. It's a big facility. It's about 50,000, the facility you requested. It's a 50,000 square foot facility that needs all these things, security and all this stuff. So, you've got about 120 people wanting to come in on New Year's Day. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be hard. And I've really already dedicated myself to say that we're not going to do that. So she tells me this story that I had no idea about. And she says that, hey, Paul, here's the deal. The people that are coming in, these are Syrian refugees. And if you remember what was going on in 2015 or around that time, so there was all these Syrians exiting Syria. And so they had been allowed to come into the country. And so I said, oh, that's great. And they said, well, there's 120 of them. They don't actually know each other, but they have been allowed to come into the Puget Sound. So they've got their whatever. And I'm working with this organization that is trying to coordinate and help them. And I said, oh, that's great. I said, yeah. So I said, well, we can have this thing on another day. We just can't do it on New Year's Day. And so she told me, she said, well, here's the deal. The reason why we're trying to do this, we're trying to celebrate their birthday. And I'm like, what do you mean? Says, well, and I didn't know this. I said, well, since the Vietnam War, that the State Department, when you come into this country and you don't have your passport, don't have your papers, what they do is they automatically give you the birthday 0101. So that's the policy that they've used. So when she shared that with me, obviously it struck a chord with me. I'm like, oh, shoot, now I have to figure out what to do for them because it's their birthday and birthdays meant something to me. But I share the story more so about the symbolism of welcoming the stranger. So even me, who's come from an immigrant family, who's worked in community for a long time, I had to scratch myself a little bit to say, am I really doing enough? Am I really including the stranger? Am I welcoming the stranger? What are we doing? And long story short, so I had to get all my friends and family. So I didn't ask my staff, and we had all my friends and family. I said, well, you're all going to come and you're all going to help me. And it was probably one of the best events I've ever done. And that tradition still lives on. So this has been about 4 years where they still do the birthday bash. But I think the letters I've gotten, the thank yous I got in that day, there was a lot of people coming and thanking me. I was like the emperor. They all came to talk to me, and I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I was smiling and they were smiling and they were happy and they were crying. But how we welcome the stranger, I think, is really important. I think we are on this journey that we want to experience America. And I would encourage everybody in all Issaquahans or all East Sider is just to remember when you first came to Issaquah, whenever you came, or whenever you remember that you came to Issaquah, and what was that feeling and why do you stay? I think the reason why you stay, it's because it's good for you and your family and you enjoy being there. And to all the panelists who talk about this park on the Issaquah Highlands, I think I need to go to that park because it seems like this is the most welcoming space on the earth. So I want to know what that park is all about and what the water out there is. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm glad you brought in the concept of welcoming the stranger, because I think we should be asking ourselves, how do we not be strangers, right? How do we create these relationships? Because we're fortunate enough today to be part of an event where we're saying, hey, we're bringing people who are willing to share their story, who, this is a space where we can have a conversation. But we can't do that unless we start to know each other and build those relationships. So we don't walk up to somebody down the street and say, hey, so tell me your experience. How did you get here? We just don't do that. We have to build up and build those relationships. So I love that you brought that into the frame. So I'm going to ask my co-host to take a look at the chat questions and think about what questions from the audience we should ask, but I'm going to give you a little bit of time because I have some questions here that I'm going to open up to the panel. And so how we do this is I'll ask the question. If you have a response, go ahead and jump in. If you don't, I might call on somebody, Paul. And so the question is, what actions can we take as a community to be more welcoming and inclusive? I think you all have embodied that as part of your values and what you do. So what would you tell folks who are here today? How can we take this step and be more welcoming and inclusive? Would one of our panelists like to begin? Go ahead, Paul.
Sure, I can take that. Thank you very much. I think that's a great question because I think people always, there's a tendency as human beings over time that we don't want to be intrusive in other people's lives. We look at ourselves and say, okay, it's good that those people are there and somebody moved in here and this person is doing that there. I really don't want to be that person who's going out there and encroaching or interfering or those kind of things. And I would say, no, humanity is about socialization. I think we thrive on socialization, and quite frankly, we're all curious. So let's just be real. We're all curious about, who's that and what are they doing and where are their kids and where do they go to school and where do they work and on and on and on. I think I just say embrace that. Not have that fear of, okay, am I going to say the right thing or am I going to say the wrong thing? And it really just starts with something as simple as hi, hello, in whatever language it may be. I think most people understand that hello is this universal language. And I think that's always a good place to start. But curiosity, embrace your curiosity, ask the questions. I think anytime I've moved into a neighborhood, it really starts with that. When do they pick up trash? It's those simple things about living together. And I always say I look at life in especially in my workplace and especially when it comes to inclusion work. Is that we're in an ecosystem. That ecosystem is really governed by three things. It's really, there's the individuals who are in the ecosystem, but then there's also the relationships, and I think that's the bigger part. It's the relationships within that ecosystem, and then there's the last thing, which is the policies, rules, and infrastructure. But the way that ecosystem works and is only successful is through the kinship between the people in there, and you're not going to create kinship by just kind of looking at somebody and waving. It just doesn't happen. Okay, so kinship is really created by social engagement. Social engagement is exactly what some folks said. They go to the park and the park is like, wow, you know, there's kids running everywhere, they're from everywhere, and no one has a care in the world. That really is what I would say is, you know, just embrace your curiosity, dive in, ask questions, and don't be too worried about, am I saying the wrong thing or the right thing? And quite frankly, if you're doing it authentically, the other people will tell you if you're saying something wrong, and they'll tell you nicely. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you for that. And, you know, I think, you know, you may have heard, or I'll tell you now, the idea of the Seattle freeze, right? Or the Northwest freeze, just that part of our culture where we tend to not invite people over or have those chats on the porch, you know, those things that build community, which a lot of folks of color, that's part of your culture. If you're coming from another part of the world, that's part of your culture. You know everybody, you know, in the neighborhood or in the community or in the barrio, or, you know, and so yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I'm going to shamelessly plug something from the libraries. We have a database called Mango Languages. So if you want to learn greetings in different languages, go there and, you know, surprise your neighbor, surprise your friend, greet them in their language. You know, you'll be surprised what kind of conversation opens up. So thank you for kicking us off on that question. I'm going to see if any of our other panelists would like to jump in on that question about how we can make our community more welcoming and inclusive. Manny, go ahead.
Thank you. I agree with Paul completely. Being open-minded or not. Recently, there was a letter sent out by, I believe it was Andrea McCormick, of the principal of Issaquah High School, and pulled it up. And one of the things that she said was that we're sorry, right? And that we can promise you that the Issaquah staff believes that Black Lives Matter and believe that school has no place for hate speech or racism. I thought that in itself opens up people to come in and ask questions and to be in one space. And I applaud her for that. Being able to identify with others different from yourself and to put yourself in their place, in their position. Simple question like, where are you from? I'm from so-and-so, helps, right? Because many times we go up to people of color and our answer is, well, I'm from Africa. Well, what they really, people might mean is that, oh, I'm from Redmond, right? But because we're so used to answering that question of where we're from, right? We get into this mode of, oh, you know, where we originate from. So I think being open-minded and having that openness, I think the mayor of Issaquah, Mary Lou Pauley, I believe, is also doing a great job of starting that conversation and getting the conversation started and not being offended when someone corrects you or says, hey, that is a microaggression or whatnot. So we're like, okay, what can I learn from that? So I agree with you completely, Paul. Being able to have that conversation start was amazing.
Thank you. And I think earlier I said you can't just walk down the street and ask somebody questions. And actually, that's the whole premise of your project, right? So the flash dance, go find someone involved in flash dance and you can engage in those conversations.
Right, right. And just to add on to that, a lot of people, well, a lot of people of color have scars that are attached to racism. And you just won't ask somebody who just had breast cancer, show me your scars, right? You have to have a relationship, right? So start off slowly and learn about them, not about their problems or what's going on.
Thank you for adding that. I'd like to open the question to either Alicia or Pat.
Yes, I can say that, you know, that's exactly what I was trying to describe before. You know, you can just jump up with somebody that you don't know and ask questions like that. Just, it's important to be mindful, but make a relationship and just start talking. I am from one of those cultures that they talk to everyone and very social. I can, you know, I go to the park and I talk to everyone who is there. And my husband, who is American, he's always like, oh my God, you know, why you have to talk to everyone? But that's how I am, and that's how I make relationships. And I think that that's what is missing. You know, I heard so many times, like, how can I have this information for Hispanics or Latinos or Chinese, and I don't know how to get to them. Like, just talk to the people who works near you or who lives near you. I was in a similar event like the one we're today, and a person in the audience asked, so I have a neighbor who's a new neighbor, and she's Chinese, and I have no idea of, you know, what to do now, because I don't know how to approach them. And it was an honest question, and the honest answer from the panelists was, just go to the door and, you know, introduce yourself, right? And you don't have to do anything special. It's nothing different in China or whatever the person is from. They just want to feel welcome and included, and just with a smile and, you know, introduce yourself, and slowly and respectfully.
Thanks, Alicia. I can add something to that. I see someone ask how immigrants can be included in various commissions and boards, and that's great, right? I don't know exactly how to go about that, but I know there are various communities, not so much on the east side, but in the Seattle large, you know, like community of Cameroonians or this and that, you know, and the words go out. I mean, some of these, there's a way to reach out to them, and I cannot tell you that now here, but invite them when it's time for elections or nomination into the board and commissions. That's a great way to get to know people and have them participate, have them have a voice. It has to go both ways, right? As you know, it goes both ways. Immigrants make, I mean, or you know, people who are just coming are making the effort, but when they see that we're also making the effort for, you know, to mingle, that will work. What else? We have a couple of celebrations at Issaquah Highland, diversity, I mean, we have every kind of things here in Blakely Hall. Maybe invite the community at large, and, you know, those are some places where we can, you know, get to talk to people in general and get to mingle in the community. And it doesn't have to only happen in Issaquah Highland. I know that Issaquah is sister city with I think Rabat, right? Is it some city in Morocco? We can use it as an excuse to have an Africa Day, or another city in Europe, or a European Day, or a celebration of sister cities around the world in Issaquah, and people will feel attracted to that. You tell me it takes resources, it takes people to run those kind of things, but sometimes it can be spontaneous, like a weekend, you know, on the plaza, something happening. I don't know, just ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. So a lot of great ideas, and sharing in information in your responses. So thank you for all of that. I'm going to ask my co-hosts if we had any audience questions that we want to address, since we do have a little bit of time. So I'll give you the mic if there are.
Hey, Joe, and thank you so much to our panelists today. This is Monica. We do have a few questions. I'm going to start with one, and then I'm going to invite our other co-host if I missed some questions. So one of the questions that I noticed comes from one of our city employees, John Davis Hayes. As city employees, we want to provide opportunities for our community to provide input participate in events, work for the city, and serve on boards and commissions. One of our struggles is to get the word out. Any suggestions on what works best for you? And if I may add, in addition to getting the word out, how can we also make sure that we maintain that welcoming stance with everyone? Yes, so that's one of the questions.
All right. Who from our panel would like to address that?
I'd be happy to take a stab at that. I do a lot of community engagement work, so I think Monica, thank you for the great question. And I think this is a challenge for every city. You know, how do you engage? How do you engage community? How do you engage community? You know, the communities out there, I think every city struggles with, we put out flyers, we put out mailers, we do all these things. We have a website, and we still are trying to engage more people, trying to reach more people. I think every panelist has mentioned it, and I think this is the part where, unfortunately, a lot of us who work in community, and especially governments and slight critique of government, we're very good at listening to respond versus listening to understand. So the truth of the matter, in my opinion, is yes, there are people who want to be engaged, but how do you want them to engage? Are you coming from the place of, and here's what we want you to do, because that's usually how we come. Here's what we want you to do. That's not engagement, that's really direction. So I'm not gonna sign up for direction. I already get enough at work, at home, from everybody, my mom, blah, 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 blah. You know, I got other things to do. And so I think there has to be that, everyone has talked about authenticity in the relationship. So what's the authenticity in the relationship? And I think part of the reason why the struggle is to get the word out is, you, quite frankly, if you look at yourself in the mirror deeply, my opinion is, you don't have people who know how to engage, meaning you don't have people within these structures who are from these communities, because if you did, they would tell you exactly how to go about doing it. And that touches on, what's the diversity at the city or at your workplace or whatever. What are the conversations you engage in as far as engagement? Is it, I think school districts do this all the time. We're having a very hard time getting people of color to show up for our meetings at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We don't know why. And if you understood, most people of color are probably working 2 jobs and those kind of things. So 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it ain't gonna happen. I hate to tell you that, but you don't understand that part. So you're beating yourself on the head thinking, how come they don't show up? How come they don't show up? It's not that they don't want to show up. It's what are you telling them? And why isn't anyone in the school district telling you that is not going to work? So if you have those people, they would tell you that is not going to work, or maybe you want to try something else. So my response to community engagement as far as City of Issaquah, I would say, you know, you have to develop some authentic relationships and go from there. And once those open up, you will be surprised. You know, I think the police are always struggling with community engagement. How do we do this? How do we do this? Until they got a little bit smarter with saying, okay, maybe we need to have some advisory groups of bringing people and just putting everything on the table. We're struggling. Tell us what to do. And the people tell them, and they're like, we didn't know it was that easy. We've been working on this for 10 years. So, but it's not as difficult as it is. I think the difficulty is in getting started and understanding what you're trying to achieve, and then moving from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Authentic relationship building. Yes. Did anyone else from the panel want to add to that before we go to the next question? I'll just wait one moment.
I can jump in. This is Jessica. I also work with KCLS with Joe. And we have a question from a community member, Elizabeth Mopan. There are a few Black families in Issaquah. Do you have any organizations that bring those families together aside from Flash Dance? Thank you.
I can take that a little bit anyway. From what I know, there is an organization called Jack and Jill. It is an organization run by people of color, usually Black women, and there's different chapters around the area, and it basically gets people of color together, and so that their kids can meet and have a relationship with other people of color, because many times in our communities, we don't have that chance to do that. So the Jack and Jill community. Also, there are many churches that are available. Go there. I don't know of any in Issaquah itself, but there are some churches that are predominantly Black in the area.
Thank you, Manny. Did any of the other panelists want to add?
Yes, I would say there's a group of mothers. Again, nothing structured, and it's a online group where we share resources. And it's a small group, organically came together. Yeah, but it's
Pat.
open and welcoming.
Thank you, Pat. All right. Shall we take another question? Either Monica or Jessica, do we have another audience question?
I see comments, and they are all just such great comments, and it sounds like our audience really, really appreciates hearing from the panelists. I don't see necessarily questions. Something just, we also have the option to unmute if anyone in the audience would like to actually verbally ask the question. We can offer that option. So I think this might be a good time. If yes, Patrick, feel free to unmute folks if anyone would like to do that. We can do it. I also would like to highlight one of the comments that said that, for example, they highlighted saying that they really liked Pat's comment about inviting us to join you and let our kids play together, which is sometimes people might not feel very comfortable doing that, or they might second guess or not knowing exactly what to do. But also, as Tisha was mentioning, sometimes it's just that easy. Just invite people to join and play, and just have that innocence and genuine questioning. So yeah, this is one of the comments. So I don't see other questions at this point, Joe.
Okay, that's quite all right. I think you all received a lot of great information today on how you can start your journey in building a community that is welcoming, inclusive, and it feels like a place of belonging for all. There may be some information you want to further pursue. Microaggressions has come up quite a bit, so if that's a new term for you, I encourage you to look into that. I think it wasn't named, but we talked a bit about racial trauma, and that is kind of how the experience of microaggressions on a daily basis manifests physically and affects folks' health, and just messages of racism that are constantly bombarding folks of color. So if there's something you heard that you want to explore further, hey, we got a great library system. And I would love to, again, shamelessly plug that we have a lot of great resources, books and authors, and we have some wonderful, Jessica happens to be a librarian who has the ability to share information that you might be interested in. I want to thank again all of our panelists, and I'll give you, since we have a couple minutes, if anybody just wants to say one more word or one more thought that came to mind.
I will jump in.
Please, Alicia.
What I want to say, I really like Paul's comment about building relationships, because it's so important, and I don't think everyone understands it. I worked for the PTSA of my kids' school for many years, 8 years, okay? And when I left, the board was diverse. There were so many accents in the table, right? But it wasn't easy. It was a long process. And it was me building relationship, talking to Pat and bringing other people to the table, right? And that's what we need. And I think that, you know, it's not gonna happen in one day. You really have to build relationships. And it's good to know that it's gonna take time, but it's so worth it.
Yes, and I'd like to give a little bring up for the flash stances. They're every Sunday weekends, usually from 12:30 to 1:30, different places, and I believe we can put that information out. But starting that conversation, I know you don't start a conversation when someone's driving across, you know, by you, honking their horns, but, you know, the whole ideal is that when they get home, they go, guess what I saw? Why were they there? You know, what do you think about it? And many of our folks there are non-people of color because I really believe it's their work to do, right? So someone might go home and ask, why did I see 25 white people on the corner asking why Black Lives Matter, right? That's how the conversation starts. And opening up the mindsets. And I tell you, the COVID thing's been working really to our advantage because you have college kids that are home now who are having that conversation with people who don't usually get to have that conversation. So that's one advantage to sticking at home with your younger kids.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add real quick, Joe. It's just, and I think I really, when I think of welcoming week, just as a footnote is, you know, navigating life in a new city, state, or country can be really daunting for anyone. But gaining familiarity with a new language and culture creates even further challenges. So I really think that we should, and it's our obligation to provide opportunities for newcomers to positively connect them, you know, with their new community, as this only helps build that solid foundation we want for an engaged community. Everyone wants an engaged community where all people are included. So I look at Welcome Week as no different from anything that you would want. We should be having Welcoming Week every week, because the inverse is, you know, you may ignore that person or refuse that person to be a citizen of your city, or make it difficult for them to be a citizen and still believe that you are a good person. And I think we hear that a lot, and especially these conversations about race today, is I'm a good person, I don't do anything, I don't bother anyone, but please realize this, that you can actually oppress even the people you love through the things that you do or do not do, including refusing them to be a citizen in your place or not including them. So you could be part of the problem inadvertently or unintentionally if you really think about it. So I would just encourage people is, you know, if you think about, like I mentioned in the story of the Syrians, so these are people who are being kicked out of their country. They're running, they're fighting for their lives to stay alive. And they come to a foreign land, and the first thing they get when they come to the foreign land is everyone wants them gone. And then they're here, the people who I was talking to had only been here maybe 2 or 3 weeks. So they don't know anything. And so nothing has been welcoming them for probably about a year or two. And the only thing they were asking for is, can I celebrate my birthday? And we still had to think twice about it. So I'll just challenge everybody, please think of Welcoming Week as, hey, welcome a stranger every week. We should be happy to do that and enjoy that. Thank you.
Thanks. I would like to add something. I do recognize that at times, you know, due to whatever we're going through or our own apprehensions, we won't go to a stranger and talk to them. But sometimes just looking at someone in the eyes, acknowledging that their person is there and giving them a smile, right? Yes, I don't know how you feel today. I'm not gonna go talk with you. Maybe I'm reserved, maybe whatever, but just looking at somebody's, right? I mean, they're coming, you look at them and you smile and that's it. Can be therapy. And I'm saying this because this is a reputation we have around Seattle, Issaquah, oh no, they're not gonna look at me. They're gonna look on the side and move on. They don't wanna acknowledge that I'm here. They don't wanna acknowledge that we're sharing the space. And that's the conversation that I have around us. I mean, I have around many of my friends. And that's a sign. Oh yeah, I'm gonna see that person. They're not gonna acknowledge me. They're gonna go past me, right through me. So I'm saying, yes, maybe we can't speak, maybe we can't invite to the park, maybe we can't invite to take coffee on the porch, but we can say hi or smile, look in the eyes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We invite you to share your comments in the chat. And also, if you want to write down something you're going to do or something that you're taking away from today's event, please do, please share. I want to just take a moment to thank the sponsors, including the City of Issaquah, Issaquah Schools Foundation, Cultural Bridges, Highlands Council. Oops, I lost my list. And all the wonderful sponsors I can't see. If Monica, if you wanted to add anybody that I missed. Well, there were a lot of great people who put this together, and we want to thank them. And again, thank you, the panel, for sharing your stories, and Erica for sharing the history. I think this is a great jump-off place to learn more, to be curious, to build relationships. So thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. So appreciate you.